it is not enough to make the old Marxist point about the gap between the ideological appearance of the universal legal form and the particular interests that effectively sustain it, as is so common among politically correct critics on the left, who see only this. The problem is that the form, this universal form, equality, freedom, is never a mere form. It involves a dynamic of its own which leaves traces in the materiality of social life. As we all know, even if at the beginning equality was just equality for the white man, really, it exploded. No? Then women said, Mary Wollstonecraft, why not us? Black said to Saint Louverture, why not us? And so on. Which means that the interpretive demystification is here relatively easy. It is relatively easy, I will put it now consciously in very naive terms. It is relatively easy to convince an honest liberal Democrat, wait a minute, don't you see that you are cheating? Don't you see that you are implicitly excluding these, those, and so on and so on? The main alternative of liberals is then to withdraw into cynicism, to say, we know egalitarianism is a possible dream, but so let's pretend we play the game, accepting silently some limitations. But in the case, what worries me is that in the case of the right-wing populism, where the enemy is usually constructed along the lines of the figure of the Jew, even if it is not the Jew, the interpretive demystification is much more difficult. You know, it's much easier to convince a liberal Democrat who claims universal freedom, equality, but you see, you are cheating, you are implicitly excluding, than to convince a fascist who genuinely, why not, cares about exploitation, but who thinks it's basically Jews who are exploiting us. And incidentally, maybe I'm a little bit of too optimist here, but there was one good thing nonetheless, till now, fingers crossed, about the recent meltdown is that at least I am not aware that the Jews were blamed for it. No? I mean, even talking frankly with my Jewish friends, with them I'm always openly anti-Semitic. I go there, how is it that nobody got you? How you Jews treat honored Americans, squeezing out of them 700 billions and so on. And they told me they were themselves surprised. Jews could be said to be so, but you know, then they gave me the true reason, which is that Jews largely lost control in the last decades over the banking system in the United States. Now, it's a totally different, but okay, but to go on. To convince fascist populists, again, sincerely worrying about exploitation, that you talk about the Jews, but it's wrong, don't you see? The Jew, as already August Bebel put it, anti-Semitism is the is the socialism of the idiots, of the poor. No, that don't you see that when you protest against exploitation and when you point out the Jew is an enemy, Jew is just a false fetish metaphor, what you are really attacking is capitalist exploitation and so on and so on. This step is, for theoretical reasons and practice shows, much more difficult to make. It's typical how, and it's a very sad thing, which shows how deeply this fetishist mode of ideology is ingrained into our functioning. How, for example, if you look at the history, Germany of the 30s, France of the 80s, 90s, as it were, the transfer, the move of ex-leftist communists towards the right populism, from ex-communists becoming fascist populists, goes much easier than the opposite movements. Like we can see with Le Pen how, I don't know, 1/3 of his voters are ex-communists in France and so on. The opposite movement is the opposite gesture is a much more difficult one. I think this concerns also, in psychoanalytic terms, at least the question of pleasure. You know, you are dissatisfied with your symptoms, but you enjoy your fetish. Like, how to put it, libidinally, there is no profit in abandoning Jew as, or somebody constructed as a Jew as the enemy. with regard to today's situation of ideological struggle, this means that we should view with a little bit of suspicion, I claim, those who, how should I put it, those who automatically read as our allies, objectively our allies, as it were, all those who, no matter how conservatively religious their ideology is, are somehow anti-American, anti-Western imperialism, and so on and so on. I mean, while I totally support, I'm accused, my God, by that cherry guy for being anti-Semitic for this, but I totally support Palestinian struggle and so on and so on, I nonetheless think that one should return to something which, again, here comes the better part of Moshe Postone. He noticed a shift where I think he was right, that is a kind of a sad symptom on the left. He said that till around 20, 30 years ago, whenever the left was supporting Western left, some third world revolutionaries, this support was always qualified not by human rights and so on, but by a minimal check-up with the program. It wasn't enough to be just against your enemy. You had to have a program which was minimally, I don't know, progressive, egalitarian, however you put it. But he claims in the last 20, 30 years, it is that as if it is enough just to be, let's say, anti-American, and then somehow, objectively, you are ours. Which is why he's right to notice how the left is not enough preoccupied with what, and I learned this, they told me this, my Palestinian friends, this decline of the secular left in the Arab countries. For example, when people were, I think this was, when people thought, you know, I got all the bad press for saying anti-Iraq war demonstrations were flawed. I participated in them, so it was more a tragic statement. But nonetheless, one thing was done wrongly there. It would have helped a lot even to convince many more people if the tragedy of the left was that the idea was the West, this, how it's called, George Galloway position basically, no? The West will attack Iraqi people, what can we do? The Iraqi boss is now Saddam, so we must defend Iraq in toto, the way it is now. Don't you think it would have been very helpful to find some leftists, and they still were there, leftist Iraqis who were anti-Saddam and at the same time anti-American? They would have been a key, I claim. The case would have been much more convinced to got on the stage of London some who were victims of Saddam and so on, but who at the same time would have been anti-American and would have made the crucial argument, which is not Saddam attacks America so we defend Saddam, but wait a minute, America saved 2-3 times Saddam, supported him and so on, which would have been much more efficient. So again, this logic of your negative position is enough, who is your enemy? For me, this is why I have some problems with this, with the position of that French, so-called, ironically, the advocate of terror, Jacques Vergès. He, I think, embodies the extreme of this position. My enemy's enemy is my ally, so don't ask any questions. Which is why, for him, being but this is, what is God telling me? This is